On August 20, 1989, in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in America, a 911 call came in that would launch one of the most controversial murder cases in American history. "I'm at 722 North Elm Drive in Beverly Hills. Someone killed my parents!" The voice belonged to 21-year-old Lyle Menendez. In the background, his 18-year-old brother Eric could be heard screaming and crying. When police arrived, the brothers ran out of the mansion toward them, hysterical. What they found inside would be described by veteran detectives as the most brutal crime scene they had ever seen. Jose Menendez, 45, had been shot 6 times with a shotgun, including a blast to the back of his head so devastating that it caused what the coroner called explosive decapitation. His wife Kitty, 47, had been shot 10 times. She was found on the floor, crawling away, before a final contact shot to her face ended her life. The room was splattered with blood and brain matter. Even hardened crime scene investigators were shaken. And for the next 6 months, everyone believed the brothers' story, that their parents were killed by mob hitmen. Until the truth began to unravel. This is the story of Lyle and Eric Menendez. 2 brothers from a picture-perfect Beverly Hills family who gunned down their parents in cold blood. Or were they, as their defense argued, the victims of a lifetime of abuse, pushed to the breaking point? Let's examine the evidence. To understand the Menendez murders, you have to understand Jose Menendez. Jose was born in Havana, Cuba, in 1944. At age 15, after the Cuban Revolution, his family fled to the United States with nothing. He worked his way up from nothing to become a self-made millionaire, the embodiment of the American dream. He met Mary Louise, Kitty, Anderson in college. She was from Oak Lawn, Illinois, a blonde, blue-eyed Midwestern girl. They married in 1963 and moved to New York City, where Jose earned an accounting degree and began climbing the corporate ladder with terrifying ambition. By the 1980s, Jose was an executive at RCA Records, signing major acts like Menudo and the Eurythmics. Later he became CEO of Live Entertainment, a film studio and home video distributor worth millions. The family moved to California, first to Calabasas, then to a Mediterranean-style mansion at 722 North Elm Drive in Beverly Hills, a 6-bedroom, 8-bathroom property with a pool, tennis court, and views of the Los Angeles skyline. On paper, the Menendez family had it all. But behind those closed doors, a very different story. Their first son, Lyle, was born in 1968 in New York City. Eric followed in 1970 in New Jersey. From the outside, they were privileged kids, private schools, tennis lessons, Princeton University for Lyle. But former classmates and family members would later describe a household ruled by fear. Jose was a perfectionist with a violent temper. According to multiple witnesses, he demanded absolute obedience. The boys were physically punished for anything less than perfect grades, for losing tennis matches, for any sign of weakness. Jose reportedly called his sons faggots, idiots, and worse, constantly, daily. And then there were the allegations of sexual abuse, which would become the most explosive and divisive element of the trial. But before we get there, let's talk about what happened that night. August 20th, 1989. A warm Sunday evening in Beverly Hills. 2 days earlier, Lyle and Eric had driven to San Diego and visited a Big 5 sporting goods store. They tried to buy handguns, but there was a 2-week waiting period. So instead they bought 2 Mossberg 12-gauge shotguns, no waiting period required. Eric used a stolen driver's license belonging to one of Lyle's friends. They also bought boxes of birdshot and buckshot ammunition. That Sunday evening, Jose and Kitty were in the family's den watching the James Bond film, The Spy Who Loved Me. It was around 10 p.m. Lyle and Eric entered the room, each carrying a loaded shotgun. What happened next was execution style. Jose was hit first. The initial blast caught him in the back of the head, a shot so powerful it nearly decapitated him. But the brothers kept shooting. 6 shots total. Jose's body was so mutilated that one detective said he looked like he had been through a wood chipper. Kitty tried to run. She was shot in the chest, the right arm, the hip, and the leg, 10 rounds total. She was on the floor, crawling away, still alive. According to testimony, Lyle ran outside to the car to get more ammunition, reloaded, then came back and fired the final shot into his mother's face at close range. The brutality was staggering. Even by the standards of Los Angeles homicide detectives, this was one of the worst crime scenes they had ever worked. After the murders, the brothers didn't immediately call 911. Instead, they left the house, disposed of their blood-soaked clothes, and drove to Mulholland Drive where they buried the shotguns. They went to a movie theater and tried to buy tickets for Batman to create an alibi, but abandoned the plan when they realized the theater time-stamped its ticket stubs. They went to a food festival in Santa Monica. Then, after several hours, they returned home. They waited a bit. And then Lyle made the call. The 911 operator later said Lyle sounded emotional but not frantic. He described finding his parents dead. Eric was heard crying in the background. When police arrived minutes later, the brothers ran out of the house screaming. The police did not check them for gunshot residue, which, in retrospect, was a crucial mistake. If they had, the residue would have shown that both brothers had recently fired shotguns. Instead, the officers comforted them, told them it would be okay, let them stay with relatives that night. The investigation initially went down the wrong path. Lyle had told police the murders might be mob-related, a business hit on his father. And for months, that's what detectives pursued. It took about 6 months for the truth to start coming out. And what blew the case wide open wasn't forensic evidence, it was greed. In the months after the murders, Lyle and Eric went on a spending spree that could only be described as obscene. Despite claiming to be devastated by their parents' deaths, they spent approximately $700,000 of their parents' money. Lyle bought a Rolex watch, then another, then a third. He bought a Porsche Carrera sports car. He invested in a buffalo wing restaurant in Princeton, New Jersey called Chuck's Spring Street Cafe. He even appeared courtside at a New York Knicks game, and ended up in the background of a Mark Jackson trading card, partying while his parents were barely cold in their graves. Eric hired a full-time tennis coach and traveled overseas to compete in tournaments in Europe. The brothers moved out of the Beverly Hills mansion into adjoining condos in Marina del Rey. They dined at expensive restaurants. They took trips to the Caribbean and London. Most of this money came from a $650,000 life insurance policy that was paid out after their parents' deaths. But here's the thing, the brothers started spending before the insurance money arrived. They used credit cards. They wrote checks. They acted like they knew the money was coming. Then came the will. Jose Menendez had recently updated his will, in a way that apparently was going to leave less to his sons. But just a week after the murders, Lyle made a sudden trip back to Princeton, supposedly for school. Glenn Stevens, a friend of Lyle's, told police that Lyle said he needed to destroy something on the family computer. A computer expert confirmed that Lyle hired him specifically to delete a new will that Jose had prepared. Then there was the screenplay. In high school, Eric had co-written a script called Friends, with a classmate named Craig Signorelli. The story was about a wealthy young man who commits the perfect murder, killing his parents for their inheritance. After the real murders, Signorelli became suspicious and contacted police. He even agreed to wear a wire to a lunch with Eric. But when Signorelli asked Eric directly if he had killed his parents, Eric denied it. Still, the police were building their case. The turning point came when Eric started seeing a psychologist, Dr. Jerome Oziel. During their sessions, Eric confessed to the murders. He told Oziel that he and Lyle had killed their parents because they wanted to be free of their father's control. Here's where it gets complicated. Dr. Oziel's mistress, a woman named Judelan Smith, claimed that Oziel told her about the confession. She went to the police. And on March 8, 1990, nearly 7 months after the murders, Lyle Menendez was arrested at the Beverly Hills mansion. Eric, who was at a tennis tournament in Israel, was arrested 3 days later when he returned to Los Angeles. They were charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances, making them eligible for the death penalty. The brothers were held without bail. Their first words to the press? "We didn't do it. It was mob-related." But the evidence was mounting. And soon, the story would shift in a way nobody expected. The first trial began in July 1993. It was a media circus. Both brothers were tried together, but each had their own jury, a procedural rarity. The prosecution was led by Deputy District Attorneys Pamela Bozanik and Lester Kuriyama. The defense was led by the legendary Leslie Abramson for Eric, a fierce, brilliant attorney known for taking on the establishment, and Jill Lansing for Lyle. The prosecution's case was straightforward. This was premeditated murder for money. The brothers bought shotguns days before. They lied in wait. They executed their parents. They went on spending sprees. It was greed, plain and simple. But the defense had a very different story. Leslie Abramson stood up in court and told the jury, "These boys were sexually, emotionally, and physically abused their entire lives. They killed their parents not out of greed, but out of fear for their lives. On August 20th, 1989, they believed their parents were about to kill them." And then came the testimony that shocked America. Lyle Menendez took the stand. Under oath, he described being sexually abused by his father starting at age 6. He said the abuse continued for years, involving oral sex, anal rape, and psychological manipulation. He described his father as a monster, who controlled every aspect of his life. Eric testified too, sometimes breaking down so completely that the court had to take recesses. He described being raped by his father from age 6 to 8, and the abuse continuing in different forms well into his teens. He said his mother knew about the abuse but did nothing, and sometimes participated in emotionally abusive behavior. More than 50 witnesses were called by the defense: family members, friends, teachers, coaches, experts in sexual abuse and PTSD. Cousin Andy Cano testified that Eric had told him about the abuse years before the murders. A tennis coach testified that Jose was obsessively controlling over Eric's tennis career. A cousin said Jose treated his sons like property. The jury also heard about the burglaries the brothers committed in 1988, stealing over $100,000 in cash and jewelry from neighbors. According to Lyle, they did this because they were terrified of their father and wanted to build a escape fund. The prosecution hammered back. They pointed out that the brothers were elite, privileged young men who had everything. They argued the abuse allegations were fabricated, a desperate defense invented after the arrest. They showed photos of the brothers laughing and partying after the murders. They painted Lyle as the manipulative mastermind and Eric as the follower. The trial lasted 6 months. In January 1994, the juries deadlocked, unable to reach a verdict. One jury was 6-6. The other 8-4 for conviction. Mistrials were declared for both brothers. The prosecution immediately announced they would retry the case. The second trial began in 1995 and would conclude in 1996. And it was completely different. This time, the judge, Stanley Weisberg, made a critical ruling that would change everything. He decided that much of the sexual abuse evidence would be inadmissible. He also refused to allow the imperfect self-defense instruction that could have led to a lesser charge of manslaughter. The 2 brothers were tried together by a single jury. The abuse testimony was severely limited. Yes, the jury heard about it, but not the detailed evidence that had caused the first juries to deadlock. The trial was also televised nationally. Court TV covered it gavel to gavel. America was obsessed. The prosecution's case was even stronger the second time. Without the full context of the abuse evidence, the brothers looked like 2 spoiled rich kids who killed their parents for money. The spending sprees, the destroyed will, the shotgun purchase, all of it pointed to premeditation. In closing arguments, prosecutor David Kahn powerfully argued, "They are not victims. They are accomplished liars. They killed their parents in cold blood because they wanted the money and the freedom." The defense argued that the abuse was real, that even without all the evidence, The brothers had suffered horribly and acted in a moment of extreme fear and emotional distress. But the jury wasn't buying it. On March 20, 1996, after only 4 days of deliberation, the jury found Lyle and Eric Menendez guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances. They were also convicted of conspiracy to commit murder. The death penalty was technically on the table, but the jury recommended life in prison without parole. The judge agreed. In July 1996, Lyle and Eric Menendez were sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. As the sentences were read, Lyle turned to his aunt and said, "I love you, Aunt Terry. We're innocent." Eric said nothing. He was crying. The brothers were separated. Lyle was sent to Mule Creek State Prison. Eric was sent to Folsom State Prison. They would not see each other again for 22 years. Prison changed the Menendez brothers. Or at least, that's what their supporters would argue. Eric married Tammy Saccoman in 1999 in the waiting room of Folsom State Prison. Their wedding cake was a Twinkie. Tammy, who connected with Eric as a pen pal, became his most vocal advocate. She wrote a book about their relationship. She appears regularly on TV defending him. Lyle married Anna Erickson by telephone in 1996. The judge officiated over the phone. They later divorced when Anna discovered Lyle had been writing to another woman. In 2003, Lyle married Rebecca Sneed in a prison visiting area. They separated in 2024 but remained friends. Inside prison, both brothers reportedly became model inmates. They earned college degrees. They mentored younger inmates. They ran rehabilitation programs. Eric led a class on anger management. Lyle became a legal advocate for other prisoners. In 2018, after 22 years apart, Lyle was transferred to the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego, where Eric was already housed. When they saw each other for the first time, both brothers burst into tears. They hugged for several minutes without saying a word. For the next several years, they lived in the same facility, the closest they had been since the night of the murders. And then, in 2023, something remarkable happened. New evidence emerged that would breathe new life into their fight for freedom. 2 pieces of evidence surfaced that the defense argued should never have been kept from the first jury. First, Roy Rossello, a former member of the Latin boy band Menudo, came forward in 2023. He revealed that Jose Menendez, who had signed Menudo to RCA Records, had raped him when he was a teenager. This was a pattern of behavior, Rossello said. Jose used his power in the music industry to prey on young boys. Second, a letter written by Eric Menendez to his cousin Andy Cano in 1988, 8 months before the murders, was rediscovered. In the letter, Eric describes his fear of his father and alludes to the ongoing abuse. He writes about needing money to get away. The letter had been lost for decades. It was found among some of Cano's belongings after his death. These 2 pieces of evidence formed the basis for a habeas corpus petition filed in 2023. The defense argued that this new evidence, combined with what was already presented, would have changed the outcome, or at least deserved a new hearing. In October 2024, Los Angeles District Attorney George Gaskin announced he was recommending resentencing. He said the brothers should be resentenced to 50 years to life, making them eligible for parole immediately because they were under 26 when the crimes were committed. But Gaskin lost his re-election bid in November 2024. The new DA, Nathan Hochman, took a much harder line. He withdrew the resentencing recommendation. He called the brothers' claims of self-defense self-serving lies. He pointed to prison rule violations, including illegal cell phone use, as evidence that the brothers had not fully reformed. In May 2025, a judge named Michael Jezik made a surprising move. He resentenced the brothers anyway, to 50 years to life, making them eligible for parole. Jezik said he was moved by the brothers' rehabilitation and the letters from prison guards attesting to their good conduct. But their freedom didn't last long. In August 2025, both brothers were denied parole, Eric first, then Lyle the next day. The parole board cited continued rule violations. Eric had a cell phone in prison as recently as January 2025, even during the height of the resentencing effort. Lyle had also been caught with illegal phones. The board said both brothers showed antisocial personality traits, including deception and minimization. In September 2025, Judge William Ryan denied their habeas corpus petition. He ruled that the new evidence, including the Rossello testimony and the letter, does not add to the allegations of abuse that the jury already considered. Today, both brothers remain in prison. They will be eligible for another parole hearing in 2028. So where does that leave us? The Menendez case is one of the most polarizing in American legal history. On one side, you have a compelling case for premeditated murder, the shotguns bought days before, the destroyed will, the elaborate cover-up, the 7-month spending spree, the lies to police. On the other side, you have overwhelming testimony from dozens of witnesses, family, friends, teachers, coaches, about a father who was controlling, abusive, violent, and sexually predatory. The prosecution says the brothers fabricated the abuse to escape justice. The defense says the system failed to understand childhood trauma and sexual abuse, especially in the 1990s, when the cultural conversation around these issues was far less developed. What's not in dispute? Lyle and Eric Menendez killed their parents. They planned it. They bought weapons. They lied to police. They spent the money. What is in dispute? Why? Were they cold-blooded killers motivated by greed? Or were they two traumatized young men who finally snapped after a lifetime of abuse, and then made terrible decisions trying to cover it up? In many ways, the answer may be both. Human behavior is rarely black and white. The same person who endures years of abuse can also be calculating and manipulative. The same person who commits a brutal murder can also genuinely believe they had no other choice. The Menendez brothers are not sympathetic characters. They shot their mother in the face while she was crawling away. They partied while investigators photographed their parents' remains. They lied for 7 months. But that doesn't mean their abuse was fabricated. It doesn't mean the system was fair. What is certain is this: the case changed how America talks about sexual abuse, childhood trauma, and the criminal justice system. The Menendez trial was one of the first true crime media sensations of the modern era, paving the way for the genre's explosion in the decades since. In 2024, Ryan Murphy's Netflix series, Monsters: The Lyle and Eric Menendez Story, brought the case to a new generation. Millions of young viewers watched, and many became advocates for the brothers' release. The public opinion pendulum has swung back and forth for 35 years. Today, Lyle Menendez is 58 years old. Eric is 55. They have spent more than half their lives in prison. They may never be released. But their case continues to raise questions we still haven't fully answered. Should childhood abuse be considered a mitigating factor in murder? Does a lifetime of suffering justify an act of lethal violence? Can someone who commits a horrific crime still be a victim? And who gets to decide where the line is drawn? The juries couldn't agree. The judges couldn't agree. The public can't agree. And perhaps that's the most honest verdict of all. This case is far from over. With new evidence, changing public attitudes, and ongoing legal battles, the story of Lyle and Eric Menendez continues to evolve. If you want to dig deeper, I recommend watching the original court TV trial coverage. It's available online and shows the raw, unfiltered proceedings that captivated a nation. Thanks for watching The Bearded Verdict. If you found this case as fascinating as we do, subscribe for more deep dives into America's most controversial court cases. And remember, in every verdict, there's always more to the story. See you next time.